Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. We've got another new Nowcast out. Look, it was the last Nowcast video that I did in the end of November that really sort of sent this channel stratospheric out of nowhere. I had about 30 subscribers, if that, 2 weeks ago. You know who you are, by the way. And then I put the Nowcast video out and did a follow-up video a couple of days later, and the channel took off. We got tens of thousands of views, and we went from, like I say, 30 odd subscribers right the way up to where we are now, just under 1,600. So the channel's rise has been extraordinary. Thank you so much for that. But I do know from my little analytics tab on YouTube that 90% of the people who watch the videos don't subscribe. So if you haven't yet and you're into British politics, please hit the subscribe button now, leave a like on the video, hit the notification bell, because we're building a community here that's engaged in British politics and active, and we're following all this polling and looking at the situation in the UK politics. And yeah, if you're into that, follow this channel, because this is going to be the place to be on YouTube. We're building something here. So without further ado, we'll get into it. This is the new Nowcast video. If you watched the last one a couple of weeks ago, you will already recognise this part of the map that we spent quite a lot of time on across two videos looking at, and you will already see, there's a little bit of Reform teal making its way through this band of the country. And yes, there is. Now, look, this is going to be very much a Reform-centric video, because Reform UK are very much the story in British politics at the moment. They simply are. They're surging up in the polls. Labour are still falling, and the Conservatives are climbing, but they're kind of stalling out a little bit. We had that sensational poll late last week, or early in the weekend, that showed Reform jumping ahead of Labour into second place in the polls. Do I think that's accurate? Probably not, to be honest, but it's the momentum. The momentum's what's important, and Reform are absolutely surging. Of course, they won, I think, about 15% of the vote at the general election, slightly less, maybe 14%. Well, the average of the polls across all polling now has them above 20%. So they are absolutely making a big impact on UK politics, and we can see that on the maps. Let's get into this. Last time we looked at this, they had already claimed Bradford South. The margin of victory was less than 0.1%. It was 0.0% is the majority, so it's probably something like 0.04% or something like that. Well, now they've stretched that out to just under 4% lead in Bradford South. They've also added to their gains in this part of the world into Greater Manchester. We can see they've taken Burnley now, 2.5% lead. This one's a very fascinating constituency. It looks like a 4-horse race. Very rare in the UK politics to get 3-horse races, but here we seem to have a 4-horse race, where 4 of the parties are splitting substantially about 96% of the vote. So that's interesting. But Reform at the moment have taken the advantage. They're ahead. You can see they've surged up 7% since the general election here. In Haywood and Middleton North, they've gained that, only 2% ahead, but beating Labour out again in an area where all of these areas where Labour won in 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn, their worst election defeat in decades. The Reform Party are putting them under pressure. That's what we were talking about last time. Makerfield is the other one. They were less than 1% behind here last time. Now they're 2.5% ahead. Again, look at a huge 8.5% surge for Reform here since July. So extraordinary gains for them in this part of the world. If we move up to the northeast, again, we can see we spent a lot of time up here in the last video too, looking at this. Look, they've only got 2 constituencies here at the moment, but we'll see in a bit later they're close to taking a lot more. And again, this was a solid red area in 2019, but they've taken Sunderland Central, only 1% ahead at the moment. North Durham, they've also taken 2.5% lead. So they're small margins of victory at the moment, yes. But, take that Bradford South example where they were less than 0.1% ahead just a couple of weeks ago. That's already stretched out to 3% or whatever it was, 3.7%. So as, Reform and Labour converge in the polls, as Reform climb and Labour drop, these margin of victories are going to just extend and extend as they also start to grab more seats off of Labour. Move down into the east coast, and we come down into West Yorkshire, and we'll find that Kingston upon Hull East has gone from Labour to Reform. Again, another 2.5% advantage for Reform here. Grimsby and Cleethorpes was another one that Reform had last time. It was very close. This one's up to a 4% advantage for the Reform Party. So, as I say, they're just extending their gains as they're flipping seats away as these poll numbers converge. Down into the Midlands, of course, they had Ashfield, that's Lee Anderson's constituency, and they had Amber Valley. That was one they had last time, but they've stretched this one out to a 6% lead now, so that's becoming more comfortable. But they've also now added Derby South. Derby South, we mentioned last time, they were very close behind Labour here. It's a majority of 0.1% at the moment, but look, same story. Expect to see that widen out if the momentums stay as they currently are. Again, a huge 8.5% surge for Reform here. Labour dropping 7.5%, substantially all of that Labour vote going to Reform. Down then into the West Midlands, and we start to see a bit of a different story. Same for now, Walsall and Bloxwich, you can see Reform ahead, but look, this was a 2019 Conservative constituency, so slightly different story to what we've had in the rest of the country. This one's an old Conservative constituency. The Tories at the moment a fairly distant third, and Reform just slightly less than 1% ahead. Into Tipton and Wednesbury, the same story. Again, a 2019 seat for the Conservatives has now become a Reform constituency by 2.8%. And then Dudley is the same, a 2019 Conservative seat. I think in the last Nowcast this was actually a Conservative win or a Conservative gain off of Labour, but the Reform Party have switched it up. They've taken this one off the Conservatives. They're now 2.5% ahead, a 6.6% surge in the polls for Reform here. So as we come to this part of the country, we start to see a little bit of a different narrative. Up to this point, we've seen in the last Nowcast we've seen Reform eating into Labour's vote, and now in this one we've seen them taking some of their seats. We're now also seeing them start to eat into Conservatives a little bit, into their seats, taking away enough of the Labour vote to overtake the Conservatives. And that's the same as we move across into Warwickshire, North Warwickshire and Bedworth. Only a 0.1% advantage for Reform, but they've eked out a lead here. Now, I think some of these Conservative ones where they're battling against the Conservatives, I think we can expect to see these flip back and forth. With Labour, it's a bit different because at the moment they're just falling precipitously in the polls. They're nosediving. All the polls are showing them losing ground. The Conservatives are stagnating slightly. I mean, they're certainly not surging, but they're not really falling. They're eking out 1 or 2% gains here or there, or just staying flat. So I think with each, as the polls come out, if the Conservatives start to fall as well, of course we're going to see Reform start to take seats off the Conservatives and stretch out leads like this to more comfortable leads. But if the Conservatives maintain their current momentum, which is eking out little gains or even staying where they are, then I think we're going to see a lot of these seats kind of flip-flopping between going Reform to Conservative, because you can see just how close it is. Very interesting one up next as we go to Birmingham, Hodge Hill and Solihull North. Now, last time, in the last Nowcast, this was going to the Workers' Party of Britain, George Galloway's very pro-Palestinian party. Well, now Reform have surged from third all the way to first from the last Nowcast, and they would now take this by a small 0.3% margin. This is a fascinating example of a constituency that clearly has diametrically opposed demographics inside it. Very pro-Palestine, I would assume predominantly Muslim voters for George Galloway, and now if a Reform who have, and these two are almost split evenly, 0.3% separating them. For Reform, very anti-immigration, generally anti-Palestine, or at least anti-Hamas for certain Reform Party voters. So yeah, and interesting. There's a few of these across the country, but this one's fascinating because Reform have just come out of nowhere, or out third to take the lead here. But the other extraordinary thing about this constituency, if you watch one of my videos, we covered this one as well. Birmingham, Hodge Hill and Solihull North was a constituency held by Labour in 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn and that awful election result for them. But not only did they hold it, they got 78% of the vote here. So Labour got 78% of the vote in this constituency, won it by a landslide. They're now down to less than a quarter of the vote, and it would go to Reform, led by Nigel Farage. Completely opposite to Jeremy Corbyn in many ways. So just fascinating stuff that we're seeing. If we move across to Norfolk and Essex, we see again the Conservatives losing out to Reform, as South West Norfolk, which is Liz Truss, the ex-Prime Minister's old seat, that goes to Reform now. This was Conservative in the last Nowcast. Now it's going to Reform. Down into Essex, and we see they've one back again, Basildon and Billericay. Now, in the last Nowcast but one, it's not the last one, but the one that came before that, this was going to Reform. The last Nowcast, the Conservatives had enjoyed a little bit of a surge in the polls, so they managed to eke out a lead again, but now it's gone back to Reform. Richard Holden, the old Conservative Party chairman, set to lose his seat once again to the Reform Party. In East London, Hornchurch and Upminster is now a 2.2% lead for Reform, another one that they've managed to flip back from the Conservatives. And Dagenham and Rainham, another Labour heartland area, 2019 held under Jeremy Corbyn. Reform now 3% ahead in this area. So Essex and Norfolk Reform starting to eat into Conservative leads a little bit. Same in Kent. Sittingbourne and Sheppey was another one a few weeks ago that was Reform, went to Conservatives, now it's going back to Reform again. So this is what I mean. We're going to expect to see these tight races between Reform and Conservative just flip-flop a bit. I think we can expect to see that. So Sittingbourne and Sheppey currently going Reform at 2.5%. Chatham and Aylesford the same, less than 1% here, very close. Expect to see it flip-flop over the coming weeks. At the moment, Reform have the upper hand. I think they held this last time, but it's Folkestone and Hythe going to Reform just under 4% now. So they're doing very well, Reform. In Kent, of course, they had a local election by-election victory here in Dartford recently. Definitely an area of the country they're targeting to do well in. So Kent, Essex, this whole sort of East Anglia area and southeast of England area, very strong for the Reform Party. Before we move on, because that's pretty much all of Reform's gains, which are the main story out of this, it would be remiss of me not to mention the SNP. The SNP are the other big winners on this Nowcast. However, I am slightly sceptical of the numbers. Now, if you disagree with me, which you please feel free to do, leave a comment, because I'd like to hear your insight. Particularly if you're Scottish yourself, or you're a bit more engaged in or involved in Scottish politics than I am, being an Englishman. Let me know what you think. The reason I'm sceptical is, let's just have a look. We're going to zoom in here to Glasgow. Now, if we look at Glasgow North here, you can see Labour's vote share in this Nowcast is collapsing by 13%. The SNP aren't really gaining, they're up less than 1%. Move across to Glasgow North East, it's the same, 14% down for Labour here. Glasgow East down 14%. Glasgow South West down 14%. So Labour's vote is just absolutely collapsing according to this Nowcast. The reason I'm slightly sceptical is, if you've been following the channel, if you watch the videos, the local election, by-election videos, you will know that the trend in Glasgow, or in Scotland generally, but in Glasgow in particular, in the last few weeks, there's been a few Glaswegian by-elections for council seats. The trend has been that Labour actually increased their vote by about 5%. In some they decreased, but not by much. In most of them they've increased their vote by about 5%. The SNP have lost between 5 and 10%, and in some cases even more, down about 13 or low teens percent. Now, local elections and by-elections in particular absolutely are not a perfect proxy for Westminster voting intentions. They're not. However, I find it a little bit disconcerting that in those elections we've seen Labour's vote either hold up or even increase slightly, and the SNP's decline, to seeing for a parliamentary poll Labour's vote collapsing really quite dramatically. They're seeing a bigger drop in support here than they have in any of those English seats we've looked at. In the English seats, they tend to be down between 7 and 8%. Here it's over 13%. So I wonder if this is a little bit of a quirk in how the model sorts out the constituencies. Now, I'm not a psephologist. If you are a psephologist, please leave your thoughts, because you certainly will be a lot more educated on this than I am. But I wonder, because when it comes to Scottish voting, you have the SNP factor in there. The SNP win seats on a much smaller percentage of the vote than anybody else, because by definition they're standing in much fewer seats. They're only standing in Scottish seats. So, the SNP can get a decent amount of seats in the House of Commons on 3, maybe 4%, if that, of the UK-wide electorate, because their votes are very concentrated in this part of the country. So I wonder if it's something to do with that. Is showing Labour's vote dropping too much, perhaps? Is it overestimating how much Labour are losing support in Scotland? I'm not sure. Let me know what you think. Like I say, that's my guess. I'm just a little bit sceptical of it. But it would be wrong for me not to mention the SNP in this video, because they are the other winners of this Nowcast, along with Reform. Look, you can see there they've gained a whole lot. They did gain some in the last one. They've added here a few more in Glasgow and over in Edinburgh, I think, as well. So that's the SNP and Reform. Now let's move on to the bit I know you guys absolutely love. We'll look at the margin. Let's look at the margin of victory in some of these areas. So we'll start in our favourite place, as you know on the channel, is this area right here, Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. This is where we looked at a lot last time in depth, and look, all these areas that the new areas that have gone to light blue, these were all a lead of less than 5% for Labour, and we said in the last video, if the trend continues in the next few weeks, expect to see in the next Nowcast they're going to turn blue, and they have. We also said the slightly darker pink areas that show a lead for Labour between 5 and 10%, expect to see those go salmon pink. And look, you can see there is a wash of salmon pink in this area of the country, and there's some big hitters in here. If you watched the last video, you will know there's a number of cabinet ministers here. We'll start with one then. Pontefract, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, her lead is down to 2.2%. So look, you know, on current trajectories, if Reform can keep that train rolling in an upward direction, and if Labour keep falling, expect to see the Home Secretary seat probably flip in the next Nowcast. If not, it's going to be very close. It'll be, you know, less than 0.5% lead for her. And then she'll probably lose it in the next one after that. So look, just extraordinary what's happening here. If we go down into Normanton and Hemsworth, the same. It's 2% lead for Labour there. Down into Rawmarsh and Conisbrough, John Healey, he's the Defence Secretary. His lead last time I think was about 7%. He's down to 4.3%. So again, like that's what I said, lead of 5 to 10%. Expect to see it become less than 5. Well, that's exactly what we've seen here. John Healey, Defence Secretary, down to 4%. Next one, he's going to be down to the 1s and 2% leads as well. Again, if the momentum continues as it is. Rotherham's an interesting one. Sarah Champion's the Labour MP, been a Labour MP for a number of years. Look, Reform actually not surging here as much as they have done in other places, only up 3.5% since the general election. The Conservatives look like they're doing fantastic. They're up 11.5%, but that's because they didn't stand a candidate here in the general election. I don't know what the reason for that is. So potentially the Conservatives depriving Reform of a seat here. Obviously the Conservatives like to argue that Reform deprived them of hundreds of seats at the general election a few months ago. But this is interesting. Look, but again, there's only a 2.5% lead for Sarah Champion over Reform at the moment. So again, another one where they're very close. Last, we'll go and have a look at Spen Valley. Kim Leadbeater. I think this has been a boundary change because Spen Valley was a seat won by the Conservatives in 2019, but Kim Leadbeater has been a Labour MP for a number of years. So whether or not she changed seats, she was always from this area. I think she was Batley and Spen, so there's been a change in boundary there. But anyway, look, only a 0.4% lead for her over Reform, so that's going to flip in the next Nowcast. Lastly, Halifax is a 1.2% lead for Labour over Reform. I expect that one would probably flip as well on the current trajectory. So you can see there are a handful of Yorkshire seats where you can expect to see them flip. And look, you know, we look at Barnsley North is only a 5.4% lead for Dan Jarvis. Obviously, Barnsley South we looked at earlier. The Reform have already got that. Barnsley North's going in the same direction. Wakefield and Rothwell 7.4% lead. That's probably at risk of dropping down into that salmon pink category. Even Leeds South West and Morley. Look, this one's 9%, so it's a bit more comfortable. But the fact is that close is a little bit concerning, although in all fairness the Conservatives did win this one in 2019, so it's not as safe as the other Leeds constituencies are for Labour. Let's move across into Greater Manchester. We'll start with another of the big hitters, Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, the Housing Secretary. Her lead's down to 3.2%. You know, again, just extraordinary. Another area of the country that the Conservatives don't win here. It's Reform. Reform are putting Labour under pressure in these stronghold seats. These shouldn't be battlegrounds. These should be nailed on Labour wins, and they certainly aren't anymore. These are battlegrounds for Labour now. Moving up to Oldham West, less than 1%, that's going to flip to Reform on the next one. Oldham East, 0.5%, that's going to flip to Reform next time. Bolton North East, 1.1%, that's probably going to flip. Bolton South and Walkden, 2.4%, that's going to be very close, probably maybe flip or maybe less than 0.5%. So look, Reform making incredible inroads in this area of the country. I know we spoke about this last time, and it's broadly the same, but we're just seeing what we hypothesised last time, a couple of weeks ago, has come to fruition in this Nowcast. So what I'm saying is to you this time, if the trajectories continue, if Reform can keep sailing up, Labour keep dropping, even if Labour actually their drop stops slightly, if Reform can keep charging up, expect to see more of these flip to Reform, and more of the darker pink areas to become salmon pink. Same story up in the northeast. Look, we're going to go straight to Houghton and Sunderland South. This is Bridget Phillipson, Education Secretary. Her lead's less than 2%, so that's the slimmest margin of victory for all of these cabinet ministers we've looked at. Her seat will flip to Reform at the next Nowcast on current trajectories. Further across the northeast, Easington, 2.9% lead. Washington and Gateshead South, 2.5% lead. South Shields, 1.7% lead. That will flip. But also Jarrow is 8.7%, Gateshead Central 7.9%, Hartlepool 6%, Stockton North 5.6%, Newton Aycliffe 6.4%. Look, these are all going to become salmon pink, or a lot of those are going to become salmon pink. The salmon pink ones, a lot of those are going to become Reform as well. Reform are killing Labour in this part of the country. The North East, Greater Manchester, Yorkshire, they're just eating Labour up. But it's not just the Labour Party that Reform are now hindering. Now, of course, up until the general election, it was all about how much the Reform Party were going to damage the Conservatives. And of course they did. They only won 5 seats, but they ate into Conservative majorities. And in most of those cases, the Conservatives lost out to Labour. Since the general election, it's been a lot of in the last few weeks in particular, as Labour's vote share has just collapsed, it's been about all these seats that Reform will win off of Labour. But in the southeast, the Reform Party are putting the Conservatives under pressure. If we look at Castle Point, they're 2.6% ahead of the Reform Party in Castle Point. We've already spoken about these other areas down here that the Reform Party are already flipping. Labour are also under pressure from Reform in Thurrock, 1.2% behind there. So again, it's kind of Labour and Conservative down here because Labour won this area off of the Conservatives. Now Reform are starting to challenge. Move away a little bit further north and we'll see that Lowestoft is a 0.5% lead for the Conservatives over Reform. Down into Kent, and again at the expense of Labour, it's Dover and Deal, 0.6%, but in Ashford, 2.6% for the Tories. So you can just see Reform are putting the Conservatives under pressure in various of these southeastern seats as well. Right, so that's the Nowcast. That's the map of England and Wales. I can't get Scotland in the screen, unfortunately. You should be able to see most of England and Wales, though. Before I finish the video, just because of how instrumental Reform are becoming in British politics. Frankly, we haven't seen anything like this in British politics before. This is a non-establishment party who have formed pretty much out of nothing over the last 5 years, really. And look, they are making waves that isn't supposed to be possible in the two-party system that we have. They are on course to smash the two-party system. Now, can they do that? Well, that's a different kettle of fish, and we'll see if they have a ceiling. We'll see that in the coming months, and we'll follow it. You follow this channel, we'll follow that. But what we are seeing is extraordinary. And to hammer home that point, what I wanted to do is we've looked at a number of seats there where Reform are close behind Labour, out all the Conservatives. I've made a list of the constituencies that I saw, and there's probably maybe some that I missed. The constituencies in England, so not Wales, because there's more in Wales, but just in England, where Reform are within 5% of first place, of the party in first place. Doesn't necessarily mean they're in second, but they're within 5% of the lead. Most of these they are in second, but some of them they're a very close 3-horse race between Labour, Tory and Reform. So they are within 5% in Bishop Auckland, Blackpool South, Blackpool North, Hyndburn, Scarborough, Bridlington, Mansfield, Bolsover, Sherwood Forest, Erewash, Stoke-on-Trent North, Stoke-on-Trent Central, Newcastle under Lyne, Telford, Tamworth, Nuneaton, Birmingham Erdington, Birmingham Northfield, Hales Owen, Wyre Forest, Lowestoft, Castle Point, Rochester and Stroud, Gillingham and Rainham, Maidstone, Dover and Deal, Ashford, Bexley Heath, Havant, Isle of Wight East, Bridgewater, South East Cornwall and St Austell and New Quay. Now some of those we mentioned in that video. I didn't cover any of the ones in Greater Manchester and the North East and Yorkshire because we went in quite detail on those. That's 33 constituencies. Aside from all those ones in those areas that I just mentioned, 33 constituencies where Reform are within 5% of the leader. Now, will they win all of those? Well, no, probably not. But they're close. They're very close in all of them. And look, Reform are making pretty incredible moves in British politics. I thought that list would just hammer home. And again, bear in mind that's just England. You know, there's, as you know, if you watch the channel, there's a decent handful in the south of Wales too, where Reform are very close behind Labour. And if Reform can continue their momentum, if they, you know, in the averages of the polls now, they're up above 20%. They're in the 20% now. If they can march on towards 25%, you're going to start seeing an awful lot more Reform teal on this map. Very interesting times. If you're into politics, like I've said, this channel, subscribe to it. We're going to do these videos when the Nowcasts come out. We're going to be following it. So yeah, get involved with this community and do leave your comments with your thoughts. You know, if you live in one of those constituencies I just listed, please let me know your thoughts. Do you think that Reform have momentum where you live, or not? You know, let me know. It's interesting to see what you all think. We're going to have a look now at how the seats would play out, what the seat numbers are on this Nowcast. So here it is. Merry Christmas. This is how the seats would fall if that Nowcast were to be a general election result. And you can see Labour again down significantly from just 6 months ago. 117 seats they've shed already, losing their majority, as we know. The Conservatives would be up 78. That's worse than their performance last Nowcast, and that's because Reform have snagged a couple of seats off of them. They've improved to 30 seats, up 25 on their current parliamentary seats. The SNP, the other winners, as I said, up 13. So again, it would be probably a Labour Lib Dem coalition if this were to be a result. Goodness only knows what that would mean in terms of policy and what have you. Of course, not going to happen. We're not going to have a general election, but just hypothetically to think about, that would be the only way that you could really get a majority government. So that's it for this video. That's it for this Nowcast. Just really incredible, really exciting, to be honest. If I'm honest, I find this insurgent party of Reform very exciting. Just in how much they're managing to change the scope of British politics, how we're seeing political allegiances and lines in the sand shift. It's all shifting, and we'll see how it shakes out. If I haven't said it enough times, please do subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video. We are building a community here that follows British politics. Love to hear your comments, so please do get involved in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. There will be a by-elections preview video coming out on Wednesday for Thursday's by-elections, and there are a couple this week where are in places where Reform will be, I think, looking to win. So if you're interested in that, please do hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.